I want to read you something Robin Hanson wrote and get your response.
Mhm.
He wrote, note that Caplan's favored explanation for U.S. housing overregulation, economic illiteracy, innumeracy, status quo bias, and paranoia were all just as strong in 1980 or in 1880 when this problem wasn't nearly as bad, so they can't be the full explanation for why things are worse. We have to wonder why we ever had better regulation long ago. So do you think he's right about these problems, economic illiteracy and numeracy, being relatively static? And if so, how can these static things explain a changing situation?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? And the answer is, I don't know. I think that he's too quick just to say they were just as bad in 1880. Maybe they were less bad. But in any case, this general idea that you can't explain a variable with a constant, it sounds totally true. But if you think about it a bit more, you'll realize, no, actually, it's not correct.
If something else is changing at the same time that interacts with the step.
Yes, exactly. So cofactor theories. Like a standard one is, suppose we go and we impose a rent control law saying that you can't charge more than 10% of what prices were last year. All right. And the first year they pass that law, it will probably have no effect because it would be really unusual for prices to go up by 10% in 1 year. Second year, probably very little. Third year starts to bind in a few places. After 50 years, this will be a devastating regulation. And if someone says rent control did it, someone who is acting sophisticated will say that's not possible because the same law has been on the books for 50 years, and it's only in the last couple of decades that we've seen any problems, so it can't be that. It's like, actually, if you understand what someone means when they blame a law for something, look, one story is we're trying to explain variation. Another story is it's a prediction about what would happen today if we got rid of the law. Similarly, when I go and blame housing regulation on the psychological factors, I'm not saying that changes in these things are explain why there has been a rise in regulation. Rather, I'm just saying, look, if we change human psychology dramatically today, then there would be a drastic fall in housing regulation. That's a totally coherent point. Now, what cofactors you need to add to explain everything going on? I think part of this is just to realize that if we go back to 1880, we start with a world where the idea that you could go and regulate this stuff is just really weird, and people are only just starting to even realize what they could do. I said the same thing for immigration restrictions. Like, well, do you really think people loved immigrants in 1880 during the open borders era? And my honest action is, well, look, I don't know for sure. We don't have good data, but I would just be stunned if I had a time machine and went back to 1880 and just people say, I love immigration. It's so great. I love open borders. It's wonderful. It's more at the time of like, well, what else would we do? And there is a sense in which if government is basically not regulated something, it's just really weird to say that it could, and it's almost confusing to hear it. And furthermore, it just sounds weird to say it, and people don't like being weird. So there can be a latent general opposition to something without there being much support for the laws that would make it happen. And then once people start passing the laws, then you can get the snowball effect, which is what we said. I think of this as a special case of the slippery slope. Once we do a little bit of regulation, then, we can do a bit more. We can do a bit more. This is a lot of stories say, look, we've got these basic human psychological problems of status quo bias, economic illiteracy, paranoia, innumeracy, which are ready and available as fuel for bad policies, but you've got to go and get the spark. And then once the spark gets going, you can keep adding more fuel to the fire. And then finally you get what we've got.